Is libertarianism really fiscally conservative and socially liberal? We also talk about what's in the news, Ted Cruz, how to be invisible on the internet, and a sorta new libertarian book that came out recently.
Welcome to the Lava Flow, channeling the flow of information to the libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, and agorist community. Find us at thelavaflow.com. Here's your host, Roger Paxton.
Thank you for joining me at the Lava HQ, flowing from the state that is the worst in the nation for retirees, according to bankrate.com. This is the show that will bring you the people, places, and events that everyone in the Liberty movement needs to know. You can catch me on Twitter at the Lava Flow Pod. It's Tuesday, March 31st, 2015, and this is episode 8, the Cruzin for a Bruisin Edition. And on this fortnight's episode, what's in the news? Statists gonna state with Ted Cruz. How to live a lava lifestyle in a statist society on how to be invisible on the internet. And a new segment, the Lava Book Club, burning books. But first, what's Rustling My Jimmies this week? Let's do it to it. It is driving me crazy hearing and seeing people describe libertarianism as being fiscally conservative and socially liberal. In the past, I even foolishly used this phrase, and if I ever describe libertarianism to you like this, then I apologize. It is not an accurate description anymore, and probably never has been. Let me explain why. Fiscally conservative, while at one point may have been something to emulate, now has been defined over the last few decades or so to be the exact opposite of something that libertarians would want to emulate. Fiscal conservatives under George W. Bush's leadership brought us Medicare Part D, a massive expansion of entitlements under a Republican executive, and a majority Republican House and Senate in 2003. Bush started bandying about the term compassionate conservative to try to hide the fact that this was anything but conservative. Also, under Bush's fiscal conservative leadership, we had a new massive surge in spending on the military so they could fight 2 wars. This new neocon hawkish era of military spending was unprecedented in history, even under the Reagan administration of outrageous military spending. And what about the massive spending and the creation of a whole new bureaucracy in the Department of Homeland Security, brought to you by the Patriot Act? The TSA alone, where we are literally paying for the right to be strip searched at will, costs over $8 billion a year alone. We would, of course, be remiss to talk about the multiple massive bailouts that cost us hundreds of billions of dollars to save private companies who made bad decisions. If this is fiscally conservative, we would be doing very well to stop throwing this term around to describe libertarian philosophy. But what about socially liberal? This is even worse. Social liberalism is inherently Keynesian economically and has brought us such social liberal policies as the New Deal. Social liberalism believes firmly in the force of government being used to force decisions. A perfect example is the recent lawsuits on everything from photographers to bakers to force people to perform services or provide products for people that they may not want to associate with. It also believed fully in a strong regulatory body to cover the things that they may allow you to do. Medical marijuana in my state is a great example of this. It was on the ballot in 2012 and barely failed by 1.5% or so. The groups responsible for this have now gone back to the drawing board to redraft the language and try to get it passed in 2016. I was asked recently to support this proposed initiative. After carefully reading what they proposed, I refused. But Roger, medical marijuana needs to be available for everyone. I completely agree. But to pass the current proposed initiative would be folly. To pass this would be to put into law one of the most heavily regulated industries in the country from the very beginning, and it will only get worse. Since most things generally become more and more regulated over time instead of less regulated, starting at this insane level of regulation is just not where we need to begin in Arkansas. This proposed initiative takes the free market completely out of the process and requires that only non-profit organizations can be set up to distribute medical marijuana in this state. It is a terrible initiative that should not be passed. Social liberals want to force companies to pay for contraceptives for their employees. They want to raise the minimum wage, and they want equality enforced by law. This is not something libertarians should ever be associating themselves with. And I haven't even touched Obamacare. Trying to act like we are just borrowing part of our philosophy from conservatives and part of our philosophy from liberals makes us seem mealy-mouthed. The opposite is true, and we need to make that abundantly clear. As libertarians, we have the most consistent philosophy that has ever existed in the history of the world. As libertarians, we have the most consistent philosophy that has ever existed in the history of the world. The non-aggression principle states simply that we are against the initiation of force, nothing more. Since this seems to be one of the most important and yet misunderstood topics in libertarianism, and since that misunderstanding is what leads to the term libertarianism being used incorrectly in so many ways in our society, I will be discussing that topic on an upcoming episode. But in the interim, please stop confusing the issue by using the phrase fiscally conservative and socially liberal. It is misleading, incorrect, and as I've just talked about, not a phrase we want to be associated with. If you must describe libertarianism to someone in a short soundbite, choose something like, we won't hit each other, we won't steal each other's stuff, and we're going to keep our promises to each other. Exercise your free market muscles by going to thelavaflow.com/support and giving a per episode donation of as little as $1 an episode, or use Bitcoin. Get exclusive content, rewards, and help the Lava Flow become fiscally neutral while providing you more content. thelavaflow.com/support.
This week in the news.
In the most transparent administration in history news, the White House is removing a federal regulation that subjects its Office of Administration to the Freedom of Information Act. This was also a policy under the Bush White House, but Obama is just making it official. According to the White House, this is consistent with court rulings that hold that the office is not subject to the transparency law. To hell with court rulings. Didn't Obama himself say, and I quote, "This is the most transparent administration in history" back in February of 2013? Yes, dear listener, he did. And because Obama apparently thought there was not enough irony in the most transparent administration in history excusing itself from a law designed to make government transparent, the announcement came on, you guessed it, National Freedom of Information Day during Sunshine Week. Quote, "This is an office that operated under the FOIA for 30 years, and when it became politically inconvenient, they decided they weren't subject to the Freedom of Information Act anymore," said Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch. In Someone Had to Be First news, Senator Ted Cruz has announced his bid for the presidency. There was a lot of hope for this guy in many libertarian circles when he was elected to the Senate 2 years ago. It seems that libertarian hope is diminished based on what I've seen since his announcement, and I can only hope that that is the case. I spent some time on the last episode talking about a senator from my own backyard, Tom Cotton, so this seems like a great time to have another statist gonna state focusing on Ted Cruz later in this episode. The only good news about his candidacy is that maybe it should shut up the conservative hordes of birthers who think Obama is an illegitimate president since Cruz was born in Canada to an American mother. In its too good to be true news, 2 Republican House lawmakers have offered a bill that would end mass surveillance laws such as the Patriot Act and the FISA Amendments Act, and prevent government from forcing tech companies to build NSA exploitable flaws into smartphones, tablets, Wi-Fi routers, and other devices. Just when you thought nothing good could come out of Washington, this is a refreshing bill. Called the Surveillance State Repeal Act, it has the support of groups from across the political spectrum, including Freedom Works, Campaign for Liberty, Credo Action, and Demand Progress. But, as you know, such an important and popular bill stands almost no chance of making it to the House floor for a vote, much less get passed. We can always dream, though. In Do As I Say, Don't Do As I Do news, The Internal Revenue Service has been exposed as having such poor information security that former employees, unauthorized employees, and even some visitors to IRS facilities have access to sensitive material. According to the Government Accountability Office, taxpayers could be exposed to loss of privacy and to financial loss and damages resulting from identity theft and other financial crimes. The IRS is the same agency that has a habit of rehiring people it previously fired for snooping, has employees that are regularly exposed as identity thieves, and improperly turns over sensitive data about taxpayers to law enforcement agencies. So why are we surprised? There are many government laws and regulations that specifically cover sensitive and private information on people, including two that gives me a ton of grief in my day job, HIPAA and high tech. If our own government can't protect this data, how can they morally hold the threat of hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in fines over the heads of companies like the one that I work for? If my company had as many breaches of data as the IRS had, the government would fine us into non-existence. That sounds like a fate worthy of the IRS to me. In ideas so good they should be mandatory news, President Obama has called for mandatory voting. Obama said other countries have mandatory voting. It would be transformative if everyone voted. That would counteract money more than anything. Yes, other countries have mandatory voting, but if this were the metric for what laws we should have, then we would have 8-year-olds marrying like in Saudi Arabia, rape victims jailed for premarital sex like in Dubai, or only licensed electricians changing light bulbs in your home like in Victoria, Australia. Other countries do it is not an argument for anything. Frankly, a wise older libertarian that I hold in high regard once told me that he believed that only landowners should vote, since they are the ones that have a vested interest in how their money is used, since, of course, they are the ones who pay the taxes. I thought this was ridiculous for a long time, but now I find it hard to argue against. It is at least no more ridiculous than mandatory voting, and it would certainly go a long way to stopping the government from pissing away our taxes on frivolous things. As a quote attributed both to Alexis de Tocqueville and Alexander Tytler says, quote, "A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the majority discovers it can vote itself largesse out of the public treasury. After that, the majority always votes for the candidate promising the most benefits, with the result the democracy collapses because of the loose fiscal policy ensuing, always to be followed by a dictatorship, then a monarchy." And in a bit of personal news, many of you know that I'm the current secretary and former chairman of the Libertarian Party of Arkansas. My wife is the current chairman, and we've decided that after nearly 7 years of both of us spending so much time and energy on the LPAR that we need to take a break for a couple of terms. So neither of us are running for election to the executive committee this May at our convention. We're both looking forward to seeing a whole new leadership team take the helm and show us how it's really done because, frankly, we've just been winging it and getting very lucky. We are currently working on our 3rd round of ballot access in a row. Our first time in history in the state of Arkansas with full ballot access was in 2012. And believe me, that was a full-time job for both me and my wife to get that to happen, not to mention the team of volunteers we had. We ran candidates in 18 races that year and elected 2 Libertarians to office. In 2014, we ran candidates in 28 races and elected 3 Libertarians to office. This coming from a state that, when Jess and I got involved, was essentially a dead party. The first LPAR meeting that Jess and I attended way back in 2008 was attended by exactly 4 people: the LPAR 1st District Representative, the LPAR Chairman, my wife, and myself. To say we were a bit discouraged is an understatement, but we didn't let that stop us. It has been a hard row to hoe, but we have had a ton of successes in this state, including our most successful convention ever last year with over 100 people in attendance at our 3-day convention. So when you get an email from the executive director of the National LP, Wes Benedict, to the entire LP email list talking about your ballot access efforts, you read it. And when Wes says in the email, quote, "The LP Arkansas is one of the most improved state affiliates over the past 4 years, thanks largely in part to the leadership of Roger and Jessica Paxton," it makes you blush a bit. You feel proud of your accomplishments and what you've helped create. We have created momentum in Arkansas with a fantastic team of volunteers that will last for years. Hell, maybe even decades. But, and it must be stressed, Jess and I could never have done this without the awesome friends we have made in Arkansas that have helped us do this, have encouraged us, and have built one of the strongest LP affiliates in the nation out of what was a dead party just a few years ago. Did I say friends? I meant family, of course. I know many Arkansas libertarians listen to this show, and I want to thank you all. If I were a stupid man, I would try and name names, but I would, of course, leave somebody out, so I'm not even going to try. You know who you are. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I will see you on May 16th for the LPAR convention, Big Liberty, Little Rock.
Statist's got a state.
Ted Cruz, who is apparently a little bit country and not at all rock and roll, is the first to announce his candidacy for president. Now, I've seen a few libertarians cheering this. Really? Ted Cruz is not a libertarian at all. He may be fiscally conservative. I've already talked about that today. But he's also socially conservative, which cannot be supported in any way by libertarians. He believes in what he calls traditional marriage, even though a marriage where you pay money to the government to get permission to marry is in no way traditional. I assume, since he is a devout Christian, that when he says traditional marriage, he's talking about biblical marriage. I wonder if, like the Bible, he believes that being required to marry your brother's widow, being required to marry your rapist, being required to marry a conqueror if you are a prisoner of war, marrying a wife and her concubines, marrying a wife and her slaves, or polygamy are considered traditional marriage. I imagine not. Now, of course, it's not all bad with Cruz. He supports a flat tax, while not completely libertarian, would certainly lower our tax burden and make our taxes much easier to do. I don't support the flat tax at all, but I do agree that it is an improvement over our current tax system. Cruz also wants to eliminate the IRS, audit the Fed, repeal Obamacare, and pass an amendment to require a balanced budget. And apparently he's also against the TSA, the NDAA, and raising the minimum wage. But he is a total neocon who is much more like Tom Cotton than Ron Paul. He's pro-military intervention abroad, pro-drug war, pro-Patriot Act, and pro-gay marriage bans. Not only is he pro-drug war, but he is for enforcing federal drug laws in states where marijuana has been legalized. But he's for states making their own laws to ban gay marriage. Does this seem like a contradiction to you? Because to me it certainly does. Also, like Rand Paul, Ted Cruz signed Tom Cotton's recent letter to Iran. And what I see as the biggest contradiction of his candidacy is the fact that Ted Cruz is now going on Obamacare, a program that he, like me, wants to fully repeal. Cruz's wife took an unpaid leave of absence from her job at Goldman Sachs to help with his campaign. In doing so, the insurance their family was receiving through Goldman Sachs will no longer be there. With this being the case, here is what Ted Cruz said when asked by CNN where he would be getting his insurance.
So she's taking an unpaid leave of absence from her job, and so we're transitioning. We'll be getting new health insurance, and we'll presumably do it through my job in the Senate, and so we'll be on the federal exchange like millions of others on the federal exchange.
When Cruz was asked if he would take federal subsidies, he was less than clear on that and tried to weasel out of the question, like a typical politician.
That means you are going to take a government subsidy?
I believe we should follow the text of the law.
The law that you want to repeal?
Yes, no, I believe we should follow the text of every law, even laws I disagree with.
But there is absolutely no requirement for Cruz to go on Obamacare. They could have elected to use the COBRA insurance that they were eligible for through Goldman Sachs when his wife took her leave of absence, or they could have gone with non-group coverage like many entrepreneurs and small business people do. Yes, he would be foregoing an employee contribution from Goldman Sachs, and he would be losing his federal subsidy of as much as 75% through the federal exchange, but then he wouldn't be showing a major contradiction. Once the fallout from this interview began, Cruz's office first said that Cruz wouldn't sign up in the individual market because Obamacare has wiped it out, even though many Americans use that today, and most of them don't have a massive staff to help them sort through it all. Now his staff is saying that Cruz will likely forego the federal exchange altogether and get his insurance through the Texas Obamacare system, which does not include a state exchange. As the Daily Caller reported, this means that Cruz would use healthcare.gov to get health insurance at the same time the Supreme Court is considering ruling taxpayer subsidies for federal exchange customers illegal. Now look, I think Obamacare is a complete disaster, completely illegal, and completely immoral, as apparently does Cruz. But to make your name on opposing a program just to sign up for that program, even though you have other options, is the definition of hypocrisy. If I were in his situation, I would have signed up for the COBRA plan or gone to a non-group coverage. He chose not to, and he is already showing his true stripes. But the most disturbing part of that last audio clip I played is his comment that, quote, I believe we should follow the text of the law, even laws I disagree with. Now this is statism at its core. This is worship of the state. We should not discern for ourselves what is right or moral. We have an all-seeing, all-knowing bureaucracy that can decide those things for us. Our rulers should decide how much water our toilets flush, or that my kid can't set up a lemonade stand in the front yard, or that I can't sell raw milk, or that I can't collect rainwater on my own fucking land. This is out of control, and until people stand up and stop saying stupid shit like we should follow the text of every law, which is physically impossible, by the way, and start saying, fuck your laws, then we are in for a bleak future in this country. Rand Paul spoke up on Fox News about Cruz's presidential run, saying that, according to polls, Rand is the winnable candidate. Rand himself has a very important announcement himself coming up on April 7th. Immediately following that announcement, he will be kicking off a 5-state tour, traveling to Kentucky, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Iowa, and Nevada. I'll let you, dear listener, decide what you think that announcement may be. Have you subscribed to the Lava Flow on iTunes or any mobile device yet? Then what's wrong with you? Go to thelavaflow.com/subscribe so you don't miss a minute of the show. And while you're subscribing, make sure to leave me a 5-star rating and review the show to help others find our podcast. thelavaflow.com/subscribe.
Talk the talk. Do you walk the walk?
Are you tired of knowing that every bit of your online communication is tracked? Now, I know that I am. And you owe it to yourself to be as anonymous as possible on the internet. And that's why I'm seriously looking at purchasing this thing called the iCloak stick. Now, this is a really, really cool device. Basically, what you do is you take this iCloak flash drive, plug it into the USB port on any Mac or PC, reboot your computer to load up into the iCloak operating system, and you are completely anonymous. Sound easy? That's because it is. Now, iCloak boots up in under a minute and gives you complete anonymity on any machine, whether it be your work machine, an internet cafe machine, or your personal computer at home. It has a complete operating system and browser that spoofs your MAC address each time you connect to a network and changes your IP address so that it looks like you're in a different location altogether. It's also completely immune to any form of malware, keylogging, spyware, viruses, and other malicious software that might be on the computer you're using. There are 2 different versions of this. The regular stick costs $50 and gives you complete anonymous browsing. For $100, you get the professional version that also gives you some productivity tools, makes it compatible with Word and Excel documents, and a password management utility so you don't forget your passwords. In the next version, the Pro will also come with instant messaging tools and even a Bitcoin wallet. Now, iCloak has no backdoors, and it is completely secure, and it's based on the Ubuntu operating system and the Tor browser. You get a completely fresh and consistent iCloak operating system every time you reload into that stick. You can find this product at iCloak.org. It looks like a solid product, and I'm certainly going to give it a try. If you try it out before I get a chance to, shoot me an email with your results to roger@thelavaflow.com.
Reading is fundamental.
I don't care who you are. You don't know everything there is to know about libertarian philosophy or thought. I know I sure as hell don't. I'm learning new stuff every single day. That was one of my motivations for starting the Lava Flow. It was a way to force myself to spend time learning new things so I can share them with you. Now, part of the education for every libertarian should be the need to read. I have tried to read at least one libertarian book a month for the last few years. Sometimes I succeeded, sometimes I didn't. But now I'm going to be stepping that up to 2 books a month. I just received David Boaz, spelled B-O-A-Z, his new book, The Libertarian Mind, A Manifesto for Freedom, a few days ago. Now, this is not an entirely new book. It's a revised and updated edition of his 1998 book, Libertarianism, A Primer. And this book is exactly that, a primer on libertarianism. The first 2 chapters alone are worth the price of admission. In the first chapter, he goes into what exactly libertarianism is and why it's so consistent. My only regret in this chapter is that Boaz is not more radical. That is, more on the anarcho-capitalist side of libertarianism. He does say there is some need for government, only in so much that it should exist specifically to protect our rights and nothing more. I disagree with him on this, of course, but almost all libertarians start off as minarchists. That is, people who believe in the minimal application of government or force. Many of us progress further on the scale to full anarcho-capitalism, and some do not. Boaz has not, yet, but there's still hope. However, I will say that his arguments are sound and will make a lot of sense to newer libertarians. The second chapter is on the history of libertarianism, and I learned quite a lot from this chapter especially. Going all the way back to 6th century BCE China, he gets into details of libertarians that carried the torch before us. Chapter 3 is all about what rights we have. And man, if Boaz doesn't nail it on this one. If you don't read any chapter of this book except this one, you will walk away a more informed libertarian. Hands down. He goes into self-ownership, property rights, and the non-aggression principle in such a way as to be easily understood even by new libertarians, or even people interested in learning about libertarianism. Even people who have been libertarians for ages can walk away from this chapter being able to understand and explain it much better than before. His chapter on law and the Constitution is another must-read for everyone. He talks about what law really is, where it came from, and how far we've come from what it was supposed to be. He also goes into the Constitution as well, talking about the fundamentals of what it was supposed to do. Now, I agree more with Lysander Spooner on this when he said the Constitution either authorized such a government as we have now, or it has allowed it. Either way, it's unfit to exist. However, I doubt there is a libertarian alive, anarcho-capitalist or otherwise, who wouldn't much prefer us to be living under the Constitution the way it was meant to be versus where we are today. I know I would. If that were the case, would I still be calling for the abolition of government? Probably, because government is still force. But I would much prefer to have the much smaller job ahead of me of abolishing a government that held true to the Constitution than of abolishing the behemoth in front of us today. There are tons of other great chapters as well, including the last, The Libertarian Future, but you will have to read it all for yourself to truly appreciate this great work. I recommend this book to new libertarians who are just getting their feet wet in the philosophy. If that is you, you owe it to yourself and to everyone you want to discuss the philosophy with to read this book. I would also recommend this book for libertarians who've been around the block for a while. It is always a good idea to re-ground ourselves in the basics of our philosophy. This can only help us to explain it more simply to others who may have no idea what it is. And I guarantee that you will walk away from reading this book having learned a few things. And shouldn't that always be our goal? To learn and improve ourselves? Thank you for listening to the show this week. As always, I need to thank my favorite wife, Jessica, for her help with this show, and Sheltered Life for allowing me to use their music. For the show notes to this episode, where I put links and information that's been on this show, go to thelavaflow.com/8. I've recently received a few more iTunes reviews. Black Angel 13 said, "What a great take on libertarian views. Definitely worth the time to subscribe." Grandstar says, "Rich like cheesecake, but I can't stop eating. Highly intelligent, respectful, and efficiently efficacious. Honestly, my new favorite podcast." Trevor at poopsypoops.com, soon to be launched. Thanks so much, guys. It's reviews like this that make this podcast so much fun for me to do. And most importantly, if you like what this show gives you and you want more of it, and to keep the show ad-free, exercise your free market muscles by going to thelavaflow.com/support and giving a per-episode donation of as little as $1 an episode using Patreon. There are monthly costs associated with doing this show, and I need additional equipment and other things like that really cool new intro to continue making this show better for you every episode. If you don't want to use Federal Reserve notes, then donate with Bitcoin also at thelavaflow.com/support. Until next time, keep striking the root.
This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.